So thank you for joining us this morning. Beautiful Saturday morning. We're having a nice mild summer, aren't we? The 50s. Going through. So as Nicole said, my name is Martin Carcasson, communication studies professor here. I started the Center for Public Deliberation. It's gonna be 20 years this August. How many of you have been to a CPD meeting? I'm curious. So kind of a few y'all. How many of y'all are currently with Braver Angels? And then how many of y'all are not? Most of y'all are. So we've got a few new people. So I've been doing this work. My work is my research going all the way back to my dissertation has always been, how do we talk about tough issues? How do we come together across differences and make better decisions, better conversations, leading to better actions about our shared problems? But I've also always been really interested in kind of the tension between expertise and democracy, right? And how that needs to be a tension. If either side dominates too much, we're in trouble, right? So the work I've been doing for 20 years is trying to figure out better ways of people doing that. And particularly from the local level. A lot of my research now, I shifted from focusing on national to local, and how do we build capacity in local communities to have the kind of engagement that we need. And that's the heart of my work. I've been connected to Braver Angels in a minor way. I've been part of their Scholars Council, I think, for 6-7 years. The organization itself, I think, is around, 10 years old, I think, 10 or so. I think it's, but just recently with a new CEO, that I'll give you a couple things about him. They kind of launched this citizen-led initiative process, which is much more, Braver Angels. Actually, I think I put a slide in here. Yeah, Braver Angels right now has 131 local alliances. Each of those alliances, like you just heard, has a red chair and a blue chair, someone from both sides of the political aisle as kind of working it in local communities. They're also wanting to grow 10 times in 5 years? Is that? Yeah. Right. So they're wanting about 1,300, right? With especially with the new citizen-led solution program, Braver Angels traditionally has been much more focused on depolarization, bringing reds and blues together, right, to try to understand each other. And they have all these workshops and these programs and videos. There's a lot of national videos you kind of look at, all great, important work. And I'll talk about that today. But with the citizen-led initiative, what they were hearing from these 130 alliances was, okay, we no longer hate each other. What do we do now? And it was this next step. So the citizen-led initiative is kind of a new program for Braver Angels to say, hey, how do we help equip these local chapters now to work together, to take on issues, to be collaborative problem solvers? And for that, it kind of shifted Braver Angels right in my lane in a very positive way, because this is the work I've been doing for 20 years and the work I've been trying to kind of grow as much as possible. So when our chapter here started, late summer or early? July. So yeah. So in the summer, I was excited not only to have a local chapter to kind of work with, but that also led me to get with the citizen initiative, get more connected to the national. I think last week or so, I was named as the national co-chair for a new Civic Scholars Council. So working with the National Braver Angels to help, especially with this transition, or not transition, but additional focus on this citizen-led initiative. But if you don't know too much about me, the CPD, which I started again, 20 years ago in August, serves as an impartial resource to the Northern Colorado community. I'll get back to what impartial means in a little bit, if that word kind of jump out at you. We have hopefully a pretty nuanced way of thinking about that. I actually train undergraduate students in my classes to be facilitators. And then we design and we run and we report on events in the local community. We've run over about 600 events in our 20 years. Most of them off campus, some on campus issues. This is just a little bit of a list of the issues that we've done. We often work with the city, with the county, with school districts, with community organizations, get written into grants to help people have better conversations about tough issues as we go through it. So I like to pull this up early because this isn't the professor from the ivory tower coming down to tell y'all how to talk, right? Everything I talk about today is primarily from practice, from actually doing it out there in a real community, trying to figure out how to help people have better conversations, right? So I asked this question, I got a chance to get on there. I've been asking this question now about for the last 12 years. I get lots of talks, right? And if you notice on here, I'm asking, hey, which of these words or phrases pops out when you think about how do we describe the quality of current discourse, public discourse, how we kind of solve problems together? It's a mix of positive words and negative words. And as usual, it's always a little nerve-wracking because if you don't answer the way I anticipate, right, I have to change my whole presentation. But sadly, I'll always do, right, that all the negative words get picked before any of the positive words. Now, actually, there's one high spirited. You can also see the results on your own phone. There's one high spirited. I think there was one robust. I don't know if more than one got added. So we did get a couple of the positive ones actually answered. Yeah, one productive. No one said robust. No one said dominated by experts, which is a fascinating kind of shift, right? And that tension between democracy and expertise, we're particularly kind of shifted to all voices matter, in fact, which is good. But then we've lost kind of this sense of how does expertise kind of fit in.
Excuse me, Mark.
Yeah.
Mine says can't find presenter.
Wow.
You have to enter your name.
You shouldn't have to. If you do, if it's asking for a meeting thing, it's CSU CPD 210. It's on the code, but the QR code should have got you right on there. So this is the easiest way to explain my work, which is to change this, because democracy requires high quality communication, particularly a diverse democracy. We have to be able to talk to each other across perspectives. And this right here shows that we're not even groups, right? And as expected, especially with a crowd of Brave Rangers folks, polarized was the number one answer, right? The most common, and we got dominated by a few loud voices and mean spirited, which is often kind of the top three that I get. And what I'll talk today is kind of the two steps to undoing this, to changing this. One is to stop doing things that rewards the bad adjectives. And we have a lot of processes that incentivize bad communication. And then the second step is if you replace those bad processes with better processes, then you can really start moving the needle. So that's the work that I do from a communication studies perspective. I'm basically a process designer. You'll hear over and over today that the easiest way to explain what I do is I design processes that are explicitly created to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and actually tap into the best of human nature. And the problem is most of our processes do the exact opposite, especially at the national level. So what I'm gonna try to do is kind of cover two things. I am talking a lot this morning, right? This isn't as interactive as a normal Braver Angels. If you're able to come next Saturday, that's gonna be much more. There'll be some content, but a lot more kind of small group exercise and kind of Q&A and so forth. I try to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, but I'm here, I'm local, right? So today is like broad picture kind of layout. It's literally like my first couple days of class, kind of smushed together in a sense. On the handout that you have, the other QR code on the right or the link is a resource page. I just created a page, has all my slides, has additional kind of links to other papers that I've written that I've mentioned. We'll have links to a lot of the books that I've mentioned. I'll have links to additional videos, right? So this is like the 30,000 square foot. I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you, right? It's going to be like drinking water from a fire hose. But my goal today is just to convince you like, okay, yeah, there's something here. Right. And hopefully that motivates you to dig a little bit deeper and have additional conversations. You'll hopefully get a sense of, I love talking about this stuff. Right. And I'm very committed that we need this stuff. Right. So how do we build capacity? This is the way forward. Lots of different ways. So I'm going to do two big parts this morning. The first part's going to be a little scary and depressing, right? But I'm going to dig into a little bit on why are we so polarized? Why are we so angry, right? And show you kind of some of the evidence of that. So hopefully you don't have to leave early because the back end of it, the last 2/3 or so, is going to be the hopeful news. I've been doing this work for 20 years, and I'm still optimistic. As crazy as things are getting at the national level, as divided and as polarized as we are getting, the good news is we know how to do this. We know how to bring people together across perspectives to address complex shared problems. We just don't do much of it. And most of our systems, the political systems, the media system, the tech platforms, all unfortunately tend to divide us, right? And reward people for dividing us. But we're seeing a huge movement, Braver Angels being a part of this, but I'll show you lots of other organizations, so many of them that have been created in the last 5 years, of people saying we need something different. Particularly, lots of cool, smart people working on changing national politics, and I wish them luck, right? My focus, why I got connected with Braver Angels with their shift is from the bottom up. How do we get more and more individual cities and counties to do things differently? Right. Not only because it will help those cities and counties move the needle on lots of important issues they care about, but it'll also start indoctrinating people to the simple manipulative tactics that we get from the national level. Right now, really bad tactics work. And that's why we get so much of them, right? How do we change that? I like to think, and maybe the people that have been at CPD meetings will agree, if someone at a CPD meeting shows up with a really simple solution to a complex problem, they kind of look silly. You're like, that's not what we're doing here. Right? Democracy's hard. We have to have some tough conversations. How do we create the capacity to be able to do that? So I start with the challenges. Here's the bad news, right? This is kind of a newer way that I'm talking about these three big challenges we're facing. And the first one, which has been most of my focus, and certainly the focus of Braver Angels, is toxic polarization, right? And I have a whole nother presentation. I don't have a video of it. I've given it a few different times. Maybe I'll record it if there's interest, of really doing this deep dive into polarization and understanding it in different types and so forth. So I'm going to give you the quick version here. Right? 2 quick points. One is I believe polarization is our number one issue. Because when we're polarized at the extent that we are right now, we cannot function. We cannot have the conversations, facts don't work, right? And all this bad stuff comes out. The second argument I want to make is we're not nearly as polarized as we think. And most of that polarization is fake. It's manufactured, right? The bad news, though, is the perception of polarization is more important than the reality of polarization. So if we think we're this polarized, we get all the bad stuff. But the good news is if we get together in a productive way, we figure out pretty quickly that the other side is not nearly as evil as we think they are. So when polarization is manufactured and fake, it's not too hard to overcome. And we've seen this over and over again at the meetings that we run, but also my colleagues across the country. The second one, I'm using now the term information chaos, right? Actually just changed it this morning from information disorder, right? A new book that I'm reading, I'm like, okay, I like that word, right? The basic quick version of this is our ability to create and share information has just exponentially exploded over the last few decades, right? And now with AI going crazy the last few years, even more, right? Our ability to make sense of that information, of trying to kind of move from just noise to data to insight to hopefully knowledge, eventually to wisdom and good decisions, has not only not kept up with that, but has significantly backtracked. It's harder and harder. We're just overwhelmed with information and misinformation and disinformation and malinformation, right? That makes it really hard for us to have a conversation. When these two combine, and they often do, when we're polarized and we're just overflowing with information that we don't know what's good and what's bad, that creates a really bad situation, right? And then the third one is I'm using the term now conflict profiteers. Someone else came up with it. I'll give you some links to this stuff. Any of this that I talk about, I'll either already have the link on there. I'll need to update. I ran out of time this morning. But with the Q&A or whatever, I'm happy to add new stuff, right? So anything I talk about, if you're like, I want to hear more about that, I'll provide links or I'll do a video or something like that. But conflict profiteers is this notion that there's a lot of people that are doing the exact opposite of what I want to do. If my work is how do we create processes that avoid triggering the worst of human nature, tap into the best, they're actually getting really rich and really popular by purposely bringing out the worst of human nature. The problem is they're kind of swimming with the stream, and I'm swimming upstream, as we'll get into. Unfortunately, humans are wired for polarization and conflict and outrage. That's the bad news we'll get into, but then but we know now that we know that, we can change that, right? And we can kind of figure out how to bring out the best in human nature, first and worst. Now, these three interact really badly, right? When we have toxic polarization and information chaos, that's a thriving environment for conflict profiteers, right? That's how you draw clicks and bring eyeballs and get people to donate to your campaign and win elections and all those type of things. There's tons of efforts on all three of these. The problem is most of the efforts take on one of them. And if we take on one of them without dealing with the other two, I don't think we get very far. In some ways, I would argue Braver Angels primarily focuses on toxic polarization, and they've done a really good job with that. Right? But if we overemphasize focusing on polarization without dealing with the other two, we fall short. So the work that I'm trying to do is how do we take on all three at the same time? And that's, again, the argument I'll make is from the bottom up, building capacity for the kind of work that the engagement we need to do. Right? So this is my overall argument. The primary task of our time is to build capacity in our communities for processes that avoid triggering the worst and actually tap into the best. So why are we so polarized? And or do we seem, because again, that argument that most of this polarization is exaggerated, right? And there's 5 big factors, with the first one being the most important one. Again, humans are wired, unfortunately, for polarization and outrage. There's a whole evolutionary argument for this. If you want to dig into that, I'm happy to talk more about that in a sense, and I'll talk about some aspects of it. But this was after, right around the same time Brave Angels started, right? I helped run the process about building the new stadium here on campus, right? It was a very polarizing thing. It was also one of the only topics, and you'll kind of see a little bit of this later, that was pretty much framed as a yes-no issue from the very beginning. But the whole question is, do we build a new stadium or not? Right. And it got really, really polarized and divisive before I was even involved. And then I got the email from Tony Frame going, hey, can you help us with this issue? And I'm like, hard to say no to the president of the university, but like, oh, this has already kind of gone pretty badly, right? So we jumped in, we ran lots of forums, and I was in charge of all the public discourse and so forth. When we got people in the room with all the bells and whistles and my students and all that kind of stuff, we sparked some very good conversations, but it clearly divided the community. Right. And the Coloradan, I think it did a pretty bad job with it, kind of fanning some of those flames and so forth. And so it sent me basically to the library. Right? It was like, why were people so polarized? And why was it so hard to get people to consider anything other than the initial decision they made 3 seconds after hearing we would build a new stadium? So I did a deep dive into this research on social psychology and brain science just to kind of understand why we're polarized. And it's fascinating because there's all this new research, right? Like literally you can watch people's brains while they watch a video or read something and see what parts of the brains light up, right? They can watch your eyes and see when you're reading something and how long are you focusing? What are you focusing on and what are you not focusing on and what are you skipping on, right? So all this new research that's teaching us more and more how we're wired. Right? And I use it from a process design perspective. How do we use how we're wired, hopefully, to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and counter the best? Right? And when I say like the bad stuff is easier to trigger, it's the parts of the brain that light up a lot easier, right? So what I'm trying to do, I'm going to pick on you because I know you and you're right in front of me, right? Like we're trying to light up this part of the brain back here, right? Avoid doing the easy stuff. And how do we get the hard stuff? And to skip a little bit to the good news, humans are really good at this when you put them in the right situation. We need to tap into the best of human nature. Right? Again, 2 parts: avoid triggering the worst and actually tap into the best. So these are some of the books I read. I'm more of a text-based kind of person. And over the years, people are like, hey, you need like more pictures and cartoons and stuff in your thing. Well, I'm really addicted to books. But the reason I'm a professor is like I need to find a job that pays me to read, right? So you're going to see lots of books. I'm not doing this to show like, ooh, I read more books than you, right? I just love books, and a lot of the titles and a lot of the pictures are interesting, right? But if any of these are interesting to you, I love talking about books and sharing books, and I think I added like 10 new ones this morning, right? But these are some of the books I started digging into to understand social psychology, brain science, particularly rational, the hidden forces that shape our decision. This one won a Nobel Prize. That humans prefer to think fast, make quick decisions, rely on our assumptions. We're cognitive misers. I love that term, right? We don't want to think if we don't have to think, but we can also think slow. So a lot of my work is how do we switch people from fast thinking to slow thinking, at least for a little while, to tap into the good stuff, right? You're not smart, and 46 other ways you're deluding yourself. McGraney's a great. I love some of his articles. Just went on his podcast about a month ago or so. He's a journalist that really translates science really well. How your brain distorts and deceives, what makes your brain happy, why you should do the opposite. The Righteous Mind, Jonathan Haidt has a lot of kind of work on this of trying to help progressives and conservatives kind of understand each other. This is the classic book written 20 years ago about how people hold on to misinformation, even though all the research shows that they're wrong, right? When I say that in front of a room of city managers, they're all like, oh, right? They're like, use that one at a time in the microphone kind of thing. The death of expertise, you saw not a single one of y'all picked dominated by experts. Dominated by experts is also an interesting choice, right? Because dominated sounds negative, right? So we don't want to be dominated by experts, but do we want healthy inclusion of experts in our public discourse? Right? I'm right, you're an idiot. And this is one of the more recent ones. The bias that divides us gets into my side bias or confirmation bias or all these things that I'll get into that a little bit, but basically our brains are wired to be really easy on our beliefs and really hard on anything that challenges us. But this one has a really particular argument that he supports pretty well that I want to be clear about. For most biases, the smarter you are and the more educated you are, the more likely you'll come to control the bias. Except for my side bias. It's the opposite. The smarter you are and the more educated you are, the better you are at finding evidence that you're right and then
Yes.
refuting and poking holes in any evidence that challenges you. So when I talk about this bad news, human nature and why we're wired, it's not, oh, those uneducated people are so easy to manipulate. Some of the smartest people, some of the most credentialed people with the PhDs after their names made a decision 25 years ago and have spent 25 years convincing themselves that they're right and building up blinders that they're so sure of themselves.
So stop, Martine.
Yeah.
Question.
So
So
I'm not going to be able to take questions because then we won't get through, right?
Got it.
I love questions. I love talking about this stuff, but I kind of need to get through this. And then I'm going to hang around after. I know we're going to try to get you out of here at 11. I'll hang around, but also you got my email. So I'd love to take questions, but then all of a sudden I answer 15 minutes of the question and I don't even get close to. I'm going to skip plenty of slides already, but I appreciate it. So here are like 5 big things of my big research on this. I've got a couple articles on this. I also have like a 60-page deep dive that I wrote. Getting dated, but I've been keeping up with stuff that not too much has significantly changed. So if you love the citations and so forth, I'm happy to kind of send that to you. But here are kind of 5 big, the bad news. We crave certainty and consistency. Our brains are wired once we make a decision to protect it, right? To seek out people that agree with us, right? To avoid people that are going to challenge us, to cultivate our social media and so forth. All heard that. We prefer simple good versus simple narratives. As humans, we are narrative creatures. We think in terms of story. We process information in terms of story. We remember information in terms of story. And our favorite story is a simple good versus evil narrative. We love our heroes and our victims and our villains. And once we decide who's playing what character, we see the world through that lens. And heroes do heroic things and villains do evil things. I've got 3 kids. They're all grown now, or the youngest is in high school now. I've watched lots of Disney movies over the years, right? And most of the Disney, at least the traditional ones, it's a simple narrative, good versus evil, right? Evil is just dark, and you know, they're not misunderstood. They just want bad things. They want control, right? Evil's like winning halfway through that creates a lot of anxiety, but then good makes a comeback and vanquishes evil, and we live happily ever after. And we're training our kids from a young age. Whenever there's a problem, look for the villain. Because if the problem is caused by other people, then we don't have to do anything other than get rid of the villain. And I'm going to come back to that, right? As you saw in the title, I talk a lot about wicked problems, what I'll introduce here in a second, right? Our brains want wicked people. Our brains want problems caused by bad people with bad values. The argument I'll be making today is most of our problems, the problems are wicked. And when we shift from the easy assumption that problems are caused by bad people to putting the wickedness in the problem, it shifts the conversation. Right? Third, we're groupish. I like Jonathan Haidt's term here, groupish. You hear a lot about tribalism. I think I've got 30 books on my shelf about tribalism and so forth. That's a little more complex term. I don't want to automatically assume being tribal is bad. Right? And what I like about the groupish argument is part of this argument is we're not individualistic. As humans, we're designed to be in teams. We're designed to be in groups. There's a lot of good from that I'm going to tap into in the second half of this. There's also a whole bunch of bad on that. And pretty much the worst things humans have ever done is because we created an us and we defined a them and we dehumanized a them and we justified atrocities of them. Right? And humans are one of the only species that does that, right? There's a book that I got, called Making Monsters, right? Someone who's done a deep dive in this. Like we're one of the only creatures that kind of demonizes our own kind in some important ways, right? So this is just some of the books that mostly identity triggers us as adversaries, right? Identity creates us versus them in lots of different ways. By the way, most of the research now, if you look at all the different identities, whether we're talking about race or sexual orientation or geography or religion or politics, by far politics is the most divisive. All the other ones have just been kind of going around. Now, red and blue is the most divisive identity that's bringing out the worst in humans. And it's our dominant way to talk about all our political issues. Yay! I'm going to get back to the good news here a little bit. So those all kind of go together to my initial academic training was in argumentation. Like, how do we evaluate arguments? How do we make distinctions between a strong argument and a weak argument? My overall goal is I want arguments to matter. I want the side that has the better arguments to inherently kind of win. I want a marketplace of ideas that elevates good things and exposes bad things. But because of those three things, that doesn't happen naturally, right? And our brains are really good at finding evidence that we're right and avoiding or refuting any evidence that we're wrong, right? So this filtering and cherry picking, pick examples that fit your perspective. The new term now is called nut picking, right? The internet's really good at nut picking. That's finding the worst possible example of the other side and sharing it with all your friends, right? And they all give you the likes and you get the dopamine hits, right? Like, yay! So we always kind of the best examples of our side versus the worst examples of their side. And that's the dominant kind of way our political discourse kind of happens. So this one's so important to me. I kind of did a deeper dive. I'm going to go really quick here, but just getting a sense of it. But there's these stages of motivated reasoning, and the term motivated reasoning is like we're motivated to think in a certain way. We like to think that we're motivated for accuracy or for truth, but the default of our brains, we're motivated to protect our team. Right? We're motivated to protect the decisions that we've already made. So these stages are chronological; they build on themselves. So we're biased on what we expose ourselves to. Who are we listening to? Where do we get our news from? Right? Who do we have conversations with? And then we're very much, that's selective exposure, echo chambers, all these terms you've probably heard. When I started this work 10 years ago, there was probably new academic terms. But our world has been motivated reasoning on steroids for 10 years. So I think most people kind of have seen these. Probably the most important stage is that we're biased on what gets to our ears, and then we're really biased on how we process it, how we're kind of making sense of this. This quote has kind of haunted me for the last 10 years when I came across it. Jonathan Haidt summarizing Gilovich, two of the books I mentioned earlier. But the way they kind of explain it is like, when I want to believe something, the question I ask is, can I believe this? And pretty low kind of expectations, right? Anything that protects that, anything that goes to that, I'm done. I can stop thinking. But when I don't want to believe something, the question I ask is, must I believe this? And the rules of evidence are completely flipped, right? Any little bit that shows I can kind of dismiss it, I can be done, right? So you can see how two people from a different perspective can't talk to each other, or a real life event happens and they both interpret it in completely different ways because their brain is wired to protect their narrative. One way to think about this is our brains are wired. We're really, really good at fitting any new evidence within our existing narrative rather than to allow new evidence to challenge that narrative. And this is part of the reason facts aren't going to save us. If you're confident facts are on your side, right? Facts matter. And the best thing about the facts is they don't go away, right? But they don't have a rhetorical advantage. A good story will like beat facts every day. So we can't just rely on facts. We have to change how we talk about things. We'll dig into that a little bit more. And then the backfire effect, I don't want to get into too much in the weeds here, but a little bit of research here that shows, like, say I'm trying to convince you that you're wrong, right? In some ways, the better my argument, the stronger my sources, the clearer the numbers, the more you might backfire if we're polarized. In a polarized environment, facts don't matter. They often actually backfire because you're still going to find a flaw in my reasoning. Maybe it's because, oh, he's just a university professor. That's whatever, right? So at the end of the exchange, he's thinking, oh, here comes big bad PhD with all this research. And I still blew him out of the water. And he's even more confident that he's right and I'm wrong. Facts on their own are not going to save us. I talk to experts a lot, right? I'm like, I want expertise to matter. But throwing facts at other side doesn't work. They have to have a vested interest in what I do, which is how do we elevate our conversations? The better our conversations, the more the facts matter. They'll also say facts are never enough. We'll dig into that a lot next week if you're able to come. Most of our issues are inherently value laden. So we need good facts to make better decisions. Facts are never going to make the decisions for us. We're having some tough decisions between what values are important to us and how we prioritize them. So one way I've been playing with this is we are catty corner thinkers. We're really good at all the reasons I'm right. Keep on picking on you. And all the reasons why you're wrong, right? And that's what our brain is kind of wired to seek out, to interpret, to remember. So you can see why the people in the blue trying to have a conversation with people in the gray, and that's so hard, right? Because the people in the blue are actually thinking, people prefer all this horrible stuff to all this wonderful stuff because they're blind to the downside of their perspective and the upside of the opposing perspective. So much of my work is to fill in these blind spots. And it's not that, oh, if you have a conversation, we'll both agree in kumbaya, right? I'm still very likely to be on the left side and you on the right side, right? But the reason I should be on the left side is because the ratio of upside to downside I feel is better than that. But our brains want it easy. Our brains want good versus evil. Our brains want 100% I'm wrong, they're wrong. I'm right, they're wrong, right? So that's how we're wired. And then you'll see how our political system, our media system, our tech platforms feed this, right? So this quote actually didn't quite say this, but kind of close. I did into my paper, like most internet things, but pretty close. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. One reason why we seem so polarized when we actually aren't, because the people that are most kind of extreme on this are the loudest voices. They're the ones that post the most. They're the ones that have the most bumper stickers, right? They're the ones that watch that microphone in front of city council all the time. I'm not saying activism is bad, right? But it's generally like if you're so sure you're right and the other side's a threat, you're going to scream it from the mountaintops, right? If you recognize the tensions and you realize, oh, I'm on one side, but my side's got some issues and their side's got some good ideas, and there's often not a place for you. Where do you talk, right? When do you walk up to that microphone? So that's what we're trying to create. How do we create different situations, different ways of engaging that it welcomes the nuance, right? It welcomes the people that see across perspectives versus just always giving the megaphones to the ones that are sure that they're right and the other side's a problem. And then how we make attribution. Again, we're remembering stuff. A big one here is negativity bias. We are wired to focus on the negative, right? We care much more about the potential of losing something versus gaining something. It's called psychological reactance, right? So what happens, actually, this was probably 6, 7 years ago now, after police officers were ambushed in Dallas. But he captures the research actually pretty well. Too often we judge other groups by their worst examples while judging ourselves by our best intentions. Right? Really easy on our side, really hard on their side. And of course, the other side is doing the opposite. But that negativity bias, takes this basic aspect of human nature and blows up the bottom, right? Because that's what works, to scare people, right? To tell them all the bad news, because that's what fires people up. There's literally when you win an election, you're like, oh, we won, and you relax, right? Winning an election mobilizes the other side, right? That's why both parties are often kind of saying, we're losing, you need to send me money, because they know the threat of losing fires people up. And then how we make decisions, let's talk about it. And then you will remember we're biased, right? Sorry, let's take a picture. So again, you have all these slides in the thing, or you can email me. So that all leads to this last point, which will be more important here in about 10 minutes. Humans are really bad at nuance, at dealing with value dilemmas, at dealing with tensions, at dealing with tough choices. We don't want to do that, right? We want simple. So that starts with the human nature. That's how we're wired, unfortunately. It's not dumb. I mean, it dominates generally, but it's not automatic, and there's ways to undo it, right? And some people naturally are born much more like this or others, right? There is something called need for cognition. Actually, if you're in this room, you probably have a natural need for cognition, which means you're a little bit more comfortable with uncertainty, right? That's why you're in Braver Angels, probably. So it's general human nature. It's not automatically for everybody. But you take that, and then our political system, it's actually a two-party system with winner-take-all elections, rewards all that simplistic thinking, right? And it not only kind of has an activity bias, but then it incentivizes this. The way you win elections is to convince people that you have the magic bullets, and they're the devil figures that are causing all the problems, right? And for most of our politics, if I'm a politician on the right and y'all at the political spectrum, I spend most of my time talking to people that agree with me, right? To send me money and put signs on and vote. Maybe sometime in the middle to convince people, do I spend any time talking to people I disagree with? No, you're not going to vote for me, right? So we've created incentives that prioritize this. All you have to do is, well, all the reasons I'm right and they're wrong, right? And that often feeds negative partisanship, where lots of people just vote against the other party, right? Against the less evil. Our media system, unfortunately, particularly national, and then the internet. I've read all these biographies of people that kind of started Facebook and so forth. And at first they're all so excited. Like, we're going to, create this wonderful community, and people are going to connect, and people are going to know each other. And about 3 or 4 years in, or like 4 or 5 chapters in the book, they're like, oh shit. Like, what do we do? They're just saying this is not doing what we know, and realizing, oh no, we're taking the worst of human nature and making it worse. Right? Internet's really, really good at finding like-minded people and letting them gather, right? Engaging across difference. not so much. Right. Yeah. I will say though, and sneaking some of the good news, really interesting efforts across all three of these areas, right? Doing things differently. A lot of political reform and innovation, a lot of cool different media, kind of different ways of doing media. We're doing a lot here. I started the Deliberative Journalism Project 4 years ago, doing some interesting stuff there. And then new like pro-bridging social media, of designing social media in kind of different ways. And then the last one is conflict profiteers, like I mentioned earlier. People that specifically take advantage of this. Right? And they are a problem. We can't just assume that. So it creates this vicious cycle of exaggerated polarization. The exaggeration again here is we're not nearly as polarized as we think. But when we start with human nature, and actually I want to jump in really quickly on polarization. Two main parts of polarization. So ideological polarization is generally what most people think of. It's like we're polarized on the issues, right? To think about gun control or think about abortion or something like that, right? That you have most people. So instead of like a normal bell curve that you would normally have with issues, you have a U curve. More people are on the extreme. So we're polarized when everyone picks strongly agree or strongly disagree and no one's in the middle. Right? This actually hasn't changed much. We have not polarized on issues more than we were 30, 40 years ago. In some senses, we're starting to get it, but it's more of a factor. Effective polarization is the problem. Effective polarization is we just don't like each other. Effective polarization gets to identity, gets to the us versus them, right? So it's not so much that we disagree on an issue, it's like we just don't like each other. And that's getting scary how much it's changed in the last 40 years. So Pew Research does really good public opinion research. I know you won't be able to see these details, but they've been asking this question: do you view the other party as a threat to the nation's well-being? They started asking it in 1994. So Democrats 16% and Republicans 17% answered yes to that in 1994. 10 years later, it was 29 and 21%. 10 years later, it was 38 and 43%. So man, 2024, I was like, oh, how bad is it going to be, right? And they always release this in June. So June came and went. I emailed Pew Research, hey, when's your polarization report coming out? We're not doing it this year. What? I've been waiting for like 9 years for this, right? So we don't have the 2024 numbers. But I did find this Pew Research question. This was right before the Biden-Trump election. This is 4 years ago. Asking if the other side wins, would it result in lasting harm to the country? 90 and 89%. We went from 14% in 1994 to 90% of people thinking the other party is a danger to this country. Democracy's hard. When you assume half the country, well, not half because most of us are independents, but if you assume half the parties are full of evil people, really hard for democracy to work. So you start with human nature, you add the national political system that kind of takes advantage of all this, you add the partisan media, you add this the internet, you add that creates this vicious cycle, right? And it leads us almost done with the negative stuff. The rest of this is how happy is we get this hyperpolarization. Most of politics is just gotcha wars, right? Let me find the worst example of what the other side did and kind of send that to other people to make them angry. And that literally is dopamine to us, right? I was listening to a podcast yesterday about that, of like hearing how horrible the other side is makes you happy. It actually releases things in your body that you crave. Hearing bad things about the other side, you want that more than good things about your side. Right? It leads to the outrage industrial complex, right? That there's a whole bunch of people making a whole bunch of money making us angry. And stealing our attention, right? There's a mean-spiritedness and contempt of politics that we've never seen. I mean, it's hard to say we're more polarized than ever. We had a civil war in this country, right? But the levels of contempt is this mix of anger and disgust, which is particularly corrosive to things, right? That we're just kind of getting and tapping into more. And that leads to the assumptions of negative motives. When you have negative motives, it stops. Why even bother listening to each other? If I assume you've got hidden motives, if you assume that you got bad values, a lot of what we'll dig into next week, that fuels conspiracy theories. For a communication professor, conspiracy theories are really, really hard because anything I do to try to undo a conspiracy theory gets swallowed up by the conspiracy theory. That's exactly what's somewhere. And it just undermines our ability to function whatsoever. But most importantly, we've got serious issues. We've got things that we need to deal with in our town, in our country. And we're spending so much of our time and so much of our creativity on playing this stupid game that's making it harder for us to come together across differences to address our shared problems. So now the good news. I'm going to spend most of the second, or again, try to leave some time, we'll see. So what do we do about this, right? This is what's happening. This is why we're so angry. This is why so many of the processes and systems that we rely on are making it worse. The good news, like I said, we know what to do. We're seeing more and more of it from the local level up. Hundreds of organizations, academics from multiple departments, practitioners from multiple fields, whether it's conflict resolution or collaborative problem solving or dialogue and deliberate, all these people, like we know how to do this. We just don't ever use any of it in our politics. Right? We keep on using this system that we know delivers horrible results. Right? So, again, the primary task I said, how do we just, build capacity in our communities for things that tap into the best instead of the worst? And this is just pretty much exact opposite of what conflict profiteers do. Right? So I'm going to kind of walk through 5 steps. Now, kind of organized from short term to long term, right? So the short term, basically, if you bought my argument so far and you buy it for the next 15 minutes, like you can check off step 1, right? And actually, if you're already in this room for Braver Angels, you probably are almost all the way there, right? But it's what I call adopting a wicked problems mindset, which, as I'll show you for those in Braver Angels, the new framing of courageous citizenship and the wicked problems mindset overlap a whole bunch, right? It's basically how I would operationalize what does it mean to be a courageous citizen, right? So let's talk about wicked problems mindset. I have to explain wicked problems first. How many people are curious? Wicked problems is the term you've heard or familiar with, right? So a few. Some of those might have been from hearing me talk about some other time, right? It is a term that's been around for 50 years. I didn't come up with it, right? It was initially developed by civil engineers, like city planners. And the story that was told is, they got their engineering degree and they went to go work for a city, and they found out pretty quickly that the kind of problems they were trained to solve and the kind of problems they were asked to solve were very different. So they came up with this distinction between a tame problem and a wicked problem. And tame could be a really complex, really hard problem, but there is an answer to it, right? There's a technical answer. So if you're dealing with a tame problem, find really smart people, come up with a solution, and all you really have to do is how do we implement this as efficiently as possible, right? But what he kind of realizes, we're dealing with wicked problems because they're wanting me to solve this problem, but different people define that problem differently. Different people prioritize different parts of the problem differently, right? And there's no right answer, right? I can't just research this and here's the solution to the problem goes away, right? So the way I frame wicked problems is wicked problems inherently involve competing aligning values, paradoxes, and trade-offs that there is no technical solution to. Going back to the problems of human nature, humans are really bad at dealing with paradoxes and dilemmas and tensions. You see here the problem. For us to have the conversations we need to have for democracy to work, we have to identify those underlying tensions, put them on the table, and do the hard work of working through them. It's exactly what our brains are really bad at doing. And our political system and our media system and tech platforms, distracting us from actually doing it. Right? But easiest way to talk about wicked problems with some examples. So this is one that we've been working on for about 15 years now. Water is a wicked problem in northern Colorado. We don't get enough water, right? It doesn't rain enough. We're semi-arid, right? But we get a whole bunch of water, usually, maybe not this year, in May and June, right? When all the snow melts, so that our rivers are full. So for the last 100 years, we built reservoirs and ditches and so forth to kind of capture all that water. We built a pipeline to take water from the western slope as well, right? So we actually have a vibrant agricultural community, particularly to the west of us or to the east of us, right? Which couldn't survive on the rain, right? It needs all this kind of water. But we're also learning more and more about water and about the health of the river. And we're probably overworking the Poudre River. And it's creating these tensions. So we started this project 15 years ago with the Northern Colorado Community Foundation, the CSU Water Center, and the CPD, because water is going to become more and more of an issue. And we're already screaming at each other. And we need to figure out how do we come together to address this issue more productively, right? So the first meeting we had of this project, we had 300 people in the room. I passed out these little half sheets of paper with some prompts, right? When you think about the Poudre River, what concerns you, what's important, just trying to get the people's sense of it. And I'm more of a qualitative scholar. I want reasons. I want the arguments, right? Knowing if people strongly agree or disagree, that's interesting. I want to know why they agree or disagree, because that shows me their reasoning. That shows me what values are important to me. That shows me when they're relying on misinformation that might need to address, right? And then from those, I create these wicked problem slides. So a wicked problem slide for me is trying to capture what are the underlying things that reasonable people care about on this issue, right? For a lot of the other ones are more specifically values. This one's kind of more interest, like what people want. This makes a wicked problem or reveals a wicked problem in kind of two ways. One is, if you take these boxes one at a time, none of these things are bad. I even, I frame it as economic vitality instead of greed, right? Like, I want to frame it as reasonable people can care about these things. But what makes them wicked is these things don't fit together very well. Some of them do. Others, the more we focus on one of those boxes, there's a natural kind of tension. Maybe not a zero sum, but a natural tension with the other. For me, after doing this for 25 years of trying to help people engage difficult issues, most of our conversations pick one value at a time. Our brain wants to think, I care about something that's important. So if Scott disagrees with me, we love to define the people we disagree with by what they're against, right? I care about a good thing. He rejects a good thing. So then I don't have to deal with the tension. I just have to vanquish Scott, right? So the heart of a conversation we need is, how do we talk about the tension between these? How do we realize, different people are going to rank these differently? And that's the hard work. That's why you don't ever actually really solve a wicked problem in the sense of, okay, we just figure this out and implement it and the problem's gone. Because if the most of the problems we deal with inherently involve multiple underlying values that don't fit together very well, and then different people rank those differently, the best way for democracy to work is for us to have an ongoing conversation that we're constantly kind of tweaking. Now, when I say you can't solve a wicked problem, I'm not saying you can't come up with better ways of addressing a wicked problem, that you can't find better ways of balancing and negotiating these tensions, and that you can kind of improve quality of life. And yeah, you can do all that stuff. You can also do stuff that makes it worse. But you're not looking for the final solution to end the problem. You're looking at ways of how do we better engage this problem. So I try to spark three conversations. The long term is this balancing. How do we find the right balance between these values that we care about that are important? But the short term, it's often a recalibrating conversation. People might get really passionate that one value maybe has dominated too much, or one value has fallen behind, or maybe a new value has jumped up. Right? That when rivers started catching fire in the 1970s, right? People were like, maybe we should care about this. As the new values start kind of coming up, right? As we go. So that's why I allow within this wicked problems frame, you can have a really strong opinion. You can be an activist. I just don't want you to frame that in terms of one value. Both parties do this, right? If you frame it as just one value, you're inherently creating a conversation of one side's got the value and you define the other side as being against that value. And that's just going to make for a really bad conversation. So if you want to really care about a value, that's fine. Talk about the importance of that value in comparison to the other values. Make the argument that that value needs to be elevated and more important, right? Rather than do the simple thing of framing it of just focus on one value, right? And then the best conversation is transcending, not always an option, but when we get really creative and we find ways of kind of creating win-wins. Right? One of the most famous conflict resolution book is called Getting to Yes from Fisher and Ury from the Harvard Negotiation School. Right? And that's what they kind of talk about. When we move from positions, what people want, to the interests, why they want it, the interests are always, you can play with those a lot. And you actually find out when it's yes, no on an issue, it's really hard. It's a zero sum kind of thing. But when you're saying, why are you a yes or no? There's often lots of things that we can do to figure out ways of making everyone, creating a win-win. We just don't have the balancing or the recalibrating or the transcending conversation naturally, because the dominant voices are always selling us magic bullets, right? I either have the simple solution or the problem's the others. Magic bullets and devil figures always work more. We need to change that. So here are just some other ones I'll show real quick. This one we did out at Steamboat Springs. Food is a wicked problem. Again, same idea. Individually, these are all good things, but they don't fit together very well. And the heart of the conversation is, how do we prioritize these? How do we kind of work through that? Healthcare is a very complex issue, but in some ways we want these three things. These three things don't fit together very well. Right? Actually, we did a cool project about 7 years ago with Platte River Power Authority. Their mission statement, I know you can't see it, Platte River will safely provide reliable, environmentally responsible, and financially sustainable energy to the 4 cities. It's a public institution, right? The first meeting I had for us to kind of run some stuff with them, I'm like, your mission statement lays out a wicked problem, right? We love to create mission statements and value statements, and it's really easy to come up like, these are our 10 values. Does anyone ever say, how do you prioritize those? Right? Like value 2 and value 7, those are kind of opposites. What do you do there? No, we don't talk about that. Right? Like we just want to talk about the values one at a time because these are all good things, right? So we basically organize the whole conversation of like, we want these 4 things, those four things don't fit together. How do we have the tough conversation of managing that? Right? And kind of similarly, sustainability, the triple bottom line. We care about we care about the economy, we care about the environment, we care about people. Those three things don't fit together very well. But something like a well-paying, clean energy job, focus on CSU Northern Colorado, that transcends that tension. Right? We're getting away from the environment versus the economy, which has been the dominant kind of frame for 30 years of top social movement classes on the environmental movement. And we're shifting and we're making adversaries collaborators. How do we work together to kind of tap into all three of these? Right. And you'll hear that a lot for the next 30 minutes of switching from an adversarial mindset to a collaborative mindset. That's a key part of getting away from the worst of human nature and to tap into the best. So last from here, the preamble of the Constitution, embedded in there are some pretty big values. We translate those values into a little bit more modern terms, right? We get, here are 5 big American values: justice, security and safety, equality, freedom for us, and freedom for future generations. My argument here is democracy itself is a wicked problem. We care about all those values. If we do them one at a time, actually, we'll do this real quick. How many of y'all prefer justice to injustice? Just raise your hand. It's consensus, right? Again, values by definition are generally good things, right? But if we had to rank these, so jump back on the QR code if you can. Again, you got it on the first page of the slides, or it's on the top corner if you kind of get it. Hopefully, I'll kind of have it out. If you had to pick one of these values to be more important than the other 4. Now, some of y'all are saying, well, what do you mean by these words? It's an awesome question. And next week, we'll spend a lot of time on that question with a broader set of values, right? But for whatever the word means to you, if you had to pick one of these to be more important than the other 4, right? The bottom one is freedom for future generations. You can't see it on the screen. You should be able to see it on your phone, right? You see, I've actually been asking this almost for 20 years, going through. And again, you should be able to see the full results once you vote on your phone. They used to see all the screen easily, and so you see future generations there are 16%. I have literally asked this about 250 times over the last 20 years. If I have more than like 10 people in the room, I think I can count maybe on 3 or 4 times that not every single value got picked by someone in the room. Right? Now, a little bit of a harder question. Which one's least important to you? What do you put on the bottom? Now, I'm not saying which do you not care about. I'm not saying which do you reject. I'm not saying which of these values is a bad thing. But if you had to put one on the bottom, this one always goes much slower. Why I do this anonymous, right? Like you don't have to, you're not saying, oh, hey, justice. Especially if you run for office, we won't like do a commercial, right? But kind of same idea when you look at these things, you see them kind of coming in. Once again, every single one of them has been picked by at least one person in the room. Next week, we'll spend a lot of time with this concept, right? I'll do it quickly here. I'd love to spend 15 minutes here talking about that, right? Because there's a lot going on there. We have quite a few examples of your number one value is someone else's bottom value. Do you think that means we're polarized? Some huge differences? Maybe. But again, if we went these one at a time and I asked you if it's a good thing or a bad thing, right? Depending on how you're defining it, that's what we'll get into next week, right? So this exercise both shows we have tons of common ground. Part of the argument I make doing this work for 25 years, we basically all have the same values. We just rank them differently. And those rankings matter because when we're working together on shared problems, the problems inherently involve multiple values that don't fit together very well. And then we all rank those values differently. That creates a lot of conflict. Democracy, particularly a diverse democracy, conflict is inherent. We can't avoid conflict. So we either get really bad at conflict that we're doing, or we figure out how to deal with conflict better. And what we know from all this process stuff is we know how to design processes to help people deal with conflict better. So when I talk about wicked problems, the literature on wicked problems is more like a wicked problem is a category or a type of problem. There's one, some of y'all might be familiar with Adaptive Leadership by Hyphens, another Harvard professor, that talks about type 1, type 2, type 3 problems, or simple, complex, and wicked. I do it a little bit differently. I do wicked problems more as like a lens through which to see problems, right? So I'm not asking, is this a wicked problem or not? I'm asking, if I step back and look at this as a wicked problem, how might that open up space? How might that help us talk about this issue differently? So it's kind of a tool in your toolkit that you have now, right? Of like any kind of argument you have, that you can say, if we step back and look at this, let's focus on the values that reasonable people care about versus my values versus your values. And it will often kind of change the conversation. And for me, it's a huge aspect of how we switch from triggering the worst of human nature and tapping into the best of human nature. Because in those, like just with those 5 values, do you see any tensions? Like if we focus on one of those values, it might make it harder to focus on another values. Oh yeah, right. Again, we'll dig into this a lot next week as we dig into these, right? But just with those 5, there's some pretty big tensions in there. Some of the biggest American values don't fit together very well, right? Freedom and equality, the 2 biggest ones we talk about, the literature calls them God terms, right? Because they're so powerful. At least economically, the more freedom we have, the more inequality we have. If we want equality, we have to violate freedom. But we don't talk about it like that. We want to talk about them one at a time. I care about freedom, so if you disagree with me, you're un-American, right? I care about equality. If you disagree with me, you hate poor people, right? Because that makes us feel good. The tension between the values is where the hard work is. How do you retrain the brain to look for the tensions? To identify those tensions, to put them on the table, and help people work through them. Right? Justice is a fascinating one that we'll get into next week. I know you might not be there next week, but justice is a tension within itself, at least from Aristotle's perspective, which I like, right? Justice is getting exactly what you deserve, no more, no less. Justice is a term both parties use in completely different ways. Progressives see justice as equity, of taking from those who have to give to those who don't have, that need it, whereas progressives tend to see justice as proportionality. If I've worked hard, I've earned it, right? So both using the same words, completely different context, and trying to balance it in a completely different way, right? So how do we learn how to talk about those better? And then a whole bunch of others, right? So my brain's now been rewired to look for the tension, right? So either those, whole nother presentation, if you're interested, I got a basic talk on it about polarity management, right? Which is this really cool tool from the management world on how to negotiate and manage tensions better, both and thinking and so forth. But whenever I have an initial meeting about a project, my brain is wired like, what's the tensions underlying this issue that no one's talking about? Because everyone's talking past each other, right? Because each side has their own values, each side has their own assumptions of the other side, and we never actually talk about what we need to talk about, which is how do we work through this tension and find better ways of managing it, whether that's balancing, recalibrating, or transcending. So the end of wicked problems require high quality communication, creativity, and broad collaborative action for us to be able to manage them well. To go back to the question I asked you earlier, what words would you use to describe how we talk about each other? We're not close to getting high quality communication, creativity, and broad collaborative action. We've got work to do, but we know what to do, right? So let's just build a capacity. So now I'm just switching the poll EV to questions, right? Questions or insights or ahas. I'd love to hear, hey, what's the one thing you're remembering from today as we kind of go? I'll leave this on for a while. So afterwards, you got to think about it, right? You'll be able to post it. You'll be able to see other people's questions and thoughts, and you can kind of thumbs up and thumbs down them. We'll have maybe some time to talk about some of these, but I also, on the Google Doc, I'll go through, especially the ones that get lots of votes, and I'll try to respond to them and give you some resources and talk about it and so forth, right? So that will just kind of be on. It's like full. We'll look at it towards the end, but I'll just leave that on. So first step, again, I got back to was adopting the wicked problems mindset. I've explained what wicked problems are now. 30 minutes. Okay, I can do this. So 5 key aspects of the wicked problems mindset. What some of the biggest takeaways I want y'all to take. One is to use the wicked problems lens. Presume wicked problems, not wicked people. I'm not saying that there's not wicked people. I am saying like half the country is an evil. And I'm a pragmatist primarily. I want to figure out ways of moving the needle on the issues I care about. And I very much clearly know from the literature that very few people self-identify as wicked. Therefore, I know if you tell someone that you think that they're wicked, but they don't think they're wicked, very unlikely to make them less wicked. It's likely to end the conversation and polarize everything more, right? So some of the issues I deal with are clearly wicked problem, reasonable people on all different sides. And we have some other issues I deal with. maybe as I'm researching and going in, it's pretty clearly that one side has better arguments and more tied to reality. Other sides relying on some pretty bad stuff, right? And it becomes this question: do we need protest and activism and PR, or do we need to come together across differences? And that's an open question. Deliberation, I think, is a very underutilized tool, but it's not the right tool for everything. But I also believe when we're polarized, even if one side clearly has a better argument than the other side, the best way forward might be to have a really good conversation. Other way to think about this is if you're convinced that powerful people are purposely oppressing others and holding them down, I think they love the fact that we're all screaming at each other and facts don't matter. That makes it really easy for them to keep doing what they're doing. As we elevate the conversation, the BS is harder to stick, right? So that's part of the argument that kind of mixed in. So part of what we're trying to do. I guess the next one. So be more curious and comfortable with uncertainty. Retrain your brain. So to get away from the catty corner thinker, become a both and thinker, right? Seek out, and this is what Brave Rangers is great at. Seek out reasonable people that think differently than you, and ask them questions. What am I missing here, right? Fill in your blind spot of the things that maybe your side's missing. And this is the most powerful advice of talking to someone you disagree with, right? Is at some point in the conversation, you can say, I disagree with almost everything you say, but one thing you said got me thinking, right? Admit one little flaw to your perspective or one little upside to their perspective, and now we'll just open up this conversation. Because they'll feel the need to do that as well. And all of a sudden, like one of us has to win, all of a sudden you start filling in your map, right? And again, we're not saying both sides are equally the same or you have to all agree, right? But actually deal with the actual pros and cons. And this is the magic that we get into with clarity management. When you have a really good conversation and fill in your map, it starts transitioning. Instead of like who's winning, the left side or the right side, you probably agree on the upside, right? The good stuff on your stuff, oh, that's good stuff, right? And then when you tell me the down, like, oh yeah, I don't like that either, right? And all of a sudden, instead of like who's winning left to right, you're like, hey, let's try to work together to get the good stuff and avoid the bad stuff. And all of a sudden, we start having really good conversations. So how do we kind of shift that? So these are some of the books, both and thinking, clarity management, and then part of certainty. There's a lot of books that are trapped, like the identity trap, the partisan trap, the certainty trap, right? That I'm kind of getting into, right? But even more, instead of just both and thinking, being a multiple thinker. There isn't just progressive and conservative or red and blue and so forth, right? How do we get into multiple ways of thinking? And this is some of the tools deliberation does that we'll kind of touch on briefly. Right? But before I leave that, I also want to say, be more curious and comfortable with uncertainty, but not too much. This gets back to the difference between taking on polarization and taking on information disorder. Right? We need to move away from a sense of certainty. We need more intellectual humility, another term I love, right? But we don't want to overcorrect so much that we're saying everyone's opinion is just as good as everyone else's. No, because that just feeds information disorder and information chaos. So yeah, we need to understand each other and engage, but facts still matter and arguments still matter. And this is part of my work in deliberation that you'll see. I love dialogue. Dialogue is about bringing people together and listening to each other's stories, but dialogue is also inherently open-minded. Dialogue is non-judgmental. Right? Democracy requires judgment. At some point, we have to make decisions about what to do, and we can't say everyone's idea is just as good as everyone else's. So yes, move away from being so certain, but don't just flip to the other side and saying everyone's right, because that's really hard to make good decisions. And everyone's own opinion is just everyone's opinion has value, not necessarily equal validity. No, yeah, that's right. Third, put your energy towards identifying, engaging, negotiating inherent tensions. I talked about that a lot, right? Retrain your brain to look for the tensions. That's where the hard work is, right? And that's part of that. So get away from certainty. It's not that I'm right, they're wrong. Recognize that tension and then do the hard work of how do we negotiate that tension. You're not just saying, well, you've got a good idea and I got a good idea. We're good, right? I like the concept of agree to disagree in some contexts, but democracy requires us to go beyond that. Sometimes we can't just agree to disagree. Sometimes we have to make a decision on how to address a shared problem. So these are some of the tensions, other ones you can dig into. focusing on elevating the conversation, not just winning the argument. This is part of the training for my students, right? Like your job as a facilitator, your position doesn't matter, right? Your whole brain power is to help people have a better conversation. But the more I did this work, the more I realized the more people that show up for these meetings that also kind of think that, the better. And I'm not saying focus on elevating conversation, not winning the argument. I'm saying not just win the argument. It's okay to have a position, right? I want you to have a position. I want you to have a chance to express your position. But part of your brain in a democracy also has to be, how do we have a better conversation? Right? Don't just focus on winning and vanquishing the opponent. The more you elevate the conversation. And if you're so sure you're right, all you really want is a fair fight. You want a good process, because a good process means the good reasons get elevated and the bad ones get exposed, right? So the more we have people, that part of your job is to help people understand each other, the better, right? So I'm training facilitators, we'll have them, right? But the more just the people do this, and that's part of the magic of the CBD. We've been doing it for 20 years. We have lots of groupies. We have people that showed the first meeting they came to because they cared a lot about that topic. They had a strong opinion. Now they come to meetings that they don't have strong opinions on, and they're awesome because they're there to think, right? They're not there to defend their perspective. They're not there to win. They're there to like, how do we talk to each other better, right? And I think that's courageous citizenship. Yes, having an opinion, but being willing to adapt that opinion, to refine that opinion, particularly realizing having really good conversations with people I disagree with will help me improve that opinion. And part of this is kind of a shift from traditional to facilitative leadership, right? So leadership traditionally has been like charisma and public speaking and fire people up, and I can mobilize people and can still be important in a crisis situation, right? But what we need in the 21st century is facilitated leaders. A few of my friends just published a book, I haven't read it yet, on facilitated leadership, right? But it's the argument that I make for my students in particular. The superpower of 21st century leaders is going to be the ability to bring people together across perspectives. A big problem with our political system, we elect these people. Once they're in office, we expect them to be this people, and they just don't have the skill set. Right? Different at the city level, right? I think cities work differently, as you'll see kind of in a minute. And then last, work towards creating a learning community. This goes back to you don't look at problems, you find better ways of addressing them kind of over time. So how do you create capacity in your community to keep the conversation going, to improve the conversation, right? To find better ways and tweaking things as things change on the issues that we care about. Right? This comes from Peter Singate's work, a systems kind of guru, fifth discipline, of like, how do we apply that? The communities that thrive are the communities that are going to have really good ongoing conversations and build capacity for ongoing conversation. That's the heart of my work. That's the heart of Brave for Angels work. That's the heart of what the citizen-led solution is, creating capacity for better conversation. The better our conversations, the better our decisions, the better our communities. So this Wicked Problems mindset that I've been talking about for 15 years very much kind of connects with what the new CEO, Maury Giles, talks about in terms of what courageous citizen. Now, the first task of the Citizen Scholars Council that I was named to last week is to kind of clarify what we mean by this. And we just kind of had a call for papers. I think we got like 40 papers in leading up to the national conference, which is going to be June or July in Philadelphia. That will be kind of, so have completely fleshed out what this means, right? The courageous is, hey, you're doing things your brain's not used to. You're having conversation with people that think differently than you. That's hard, right? I'll also just briefly mention citizenship. For lots of people, citizenship means legal status, and that's problematic, right? But the true meaning of citizenship goes far beyond that. And Harry Boyd, who's who's actually more the chair of it, of the council that I'm on, that I've known for 50 years, or he's been doing this work for 50 years. I guess I didn't know him when I was 4, but he's written some cool things I'll post on the resource page about thinking more about civic citizenship, right? And so when we use that word, we're not saying, are you a legal citizen? We're basically saying, are you someone who cares about your community and feels some obligation to improve the community, right? And that's what we're trying to tap into that. So getting through these last few bullet points, I'll stop on time, but then I'll stick around if people want to ask questions. So rely on better processes that tap into better aspects of human nature, right? So earlier I showed you all the bad stuff, and unfortunately the bad stuff is easier to trigger. Here's the good stuff that I've been touching on a little bit. Right? The first one is we're inherently social and seek purpose and community. This is kind of the other side of the coin of the us versus them, the groupishness, right? We want to community. We want to connect. We actually agree on a whole bunch of stuff about what makes a good community. But then our political system is designed to focus on where we disagree because that's where the stuff is that gets people to donate and vote. All right, so these are a couple of books. How do we tap into the power of us, the good part, without having to rely on the negative power of them? And for me, a big part of that is going local. When I shifted from national politics to local politics 25 years ago, right? National politics dominant identity is red and blue. Right? One of the reasons I wasn't that involved with Brave Rainbow, I was interested in what they're doing, but I don't like to talk about reds and blues, right? I want to talk about Fort Collins. I want to talk about Northern Coloradans, right? Because then the primary identity brings you together versus the primary identity kind of divides you in a sense. Right? So that's where I see citizen-led solutions is like shifting from always having to focus on reds and blues to say, no, we're in this community. That's your primary identity, right? We might kind of do things differently and prioritize things differently, but we have a lot of things we agree on, right? This book, we're making monsters is one way to see it, right? Like we're one of the only species that does this. We're also probably the most cooperative species that exists. It's our superpower. That's why we've created cities and all this technology and so forth, because we're able to communicate in ways others can't and kind of capture and pass on our knowledge and work across difference. This notion is going to, in these current times, is crazy, but we're not the only species that helps strangers, but we do it on a scale that's simply unparalleled in the natural world. We're designed to connect. The whole thing is, how are we activating the us versus them? It's a decision we're making. What are the divisions and connections that we're coming up with? Conflict profiteers feed off dividing us. They profit off dividing us. We need to figure out how to shift away to make connections. So I showed you all the bad books. Here are all the good books. And reading these are much better for my mental health, right? Like, hey, let's read about all the reasons humans are awesome and how do we do more of that, right? Versus all the ways humans suck and how to do less of it, right? And we need to do both, right? But these are some of the kind of connections in a sense that we're kind of figuring out. John Powell's work at UC Berkeley, the Othering and Belonging Institute, is really good work here. How do we tap into the human need to belong without relying on the human propensity to other? Third, most importantly, humans are really good, creative, collaborative problem solvers when put in a situation that taps into that. My biggest frustration is how little our political system taps into our problem-solving ability as humans. Because we're cognitive misers. And if you could just feed us the problems the other side, we don't have to get creative. And that's the whole heart of these processes that we do, right? That normally we're face to face against each other, me against you. But then instead of assuming wicked people and now a wicked problem, now we're shoulder to shoulder working a problem. And all these really cool parts of our brains for everybody. How do we create opportunities for people to have that conversation? And this is a great, if you haven't seen this TED Talk, it's a great one. I'll make sure the link's on there. And Steve Johnson's book, Where Good Ideas Come From. We assume good ideas come from brilliant people in the middle of the night having a eureka moment. He actually shows that most good ideas come from a group of people that think differently, combining their ways of thinking. Right? That's what we have to create. Right? So we have all these processes to get like-minded people together. That's undermining our ability to solve problems. When we get people together across perspectives that think differently, that some of us think government's awesome and some of us think government's horrible, right? How do we come up with different ways of thinking differently that tap into the best of government, but deal with the worst of government and come up with different ways of civil society and nonprofits and private businesses? That's the conversations we need to have to improve our communities. But instead, we have this kind of pitted, all just talk past each other. And then last, I've been saying all day that the worst of human nature is easier to trigger. It's not. Or like how Arthur Brooks put it, proclivity is not a destiny. So it is a basic way, it's easier to tap into, but the more we do this, the easier it is to get away from that. Each time we have a difficult conversation with someone we disagree with, the next conversation is easier. Each time we learn how to ask curious questions, the questions come to us easier, right? While we're wired for this, we can build different habits. And then our communities, our organizations kind of build different norms. We can build different cultures. And the more we do this, the easier it is to do. And that's the hope of more and more communities. Hopefully, Braver Angels matches their, we have 1,300 alliances. I'm also working with Better Together America and Together Up and nationally, all these organizations, a lot of them kind of from the ground up, right? What happens 10 years from now if we have 3,000 communities that have these civic hubs that are focused on bringing people together differently? Because the heart of the CPD of running these meetings, my favorite part of a CPD meeting, I stand by the door thanking people for their time, and they walk up to me and they're tired. I made their brains work in ways they're not used to working, but they know they've done something important. And what happened with the CPD was every single meeting we ran at the very beginning, 5 people walked up to me and said, "We need to do this on this issue." Because when you give people an alternative, a genuine thing, it's hard, but they know it's important. Another whole aspect of human nature, really cool arguments about this notion of flow. Humans, in some ways, are at their happiest doing hard things well. We love accomplishment. We love reach. This is why the video companies are so rich. They tap into this. You have to level up. You have to finish the next quest, right? Because humans like to do hard things well. What happens if doing democracy together in a diverse community becomes a hard thing we get joy out of doing well? And if we get 5% of the people that's their perspective, we'll transform our communities. Bottom line, if you want to change people's minds, if you're still sure you're right and the other side's the problem, right, facts backfire, right? Mobilizing your side to win the next election. Yes, elections have consequences. I'm not going to say don't do that, right? But one of the consequences of elections is to mobilize the other side. And you see, we keep on changing the players, but we've never changed the game. If you want to change someone's mind, have a genuine conversation with them. Develop some mutual understanding and respect. And that's where you're going to have the aha moments. That's where you're going to shift people. So our current processes, 95% of our public processes, once you understand human nature, once you understand wicked problems, once you understand process design, are bad. Right? One at a time, the microphone, public hearing. Fort Collins is actually really innovative of this, partly because we've been helping them for 20 years, but even before that, right? They know how to engage people. We're a university town. We have a higher expectation. So they do things unlike lots of other cities, kind of thankfully. But most of our processes, unfortunately, kind of trigger the worst of human nature. Right? So the work that I do, we'll get a little bit into the nuts and bolts here, is with this, like, how do we actually not just have public input, right? Not just collect everyone's opinions, whether that's a survey or one time on the microphone or an email you send city council, right? Because all that is people expressing their view through the blinders. How do we actually have people engage each other and talk to each other? And that's the heart of the work that we try to do, right? So how do we build capacity? Or what I call deliberative engagement, right? I run the Center for Public Deliberation, right? How do we deliberate? Deliberation is talk about what should we do together. So we're using all these kind of bells and whistles. This is one paper I have quite a few copies up here, kind of a summary of my talk, right? So if I talked way too fast, right, and you want to read it at your own pace, you can grab that as you go. This is from another presentation. I won't go through this, but I'll just kind of make that point that you can dive into a little bit more if you'd like. When we shift from national to local, we get a whole bunch of advantages. A lot easier to deal with human nature. We have a lot of capacities and ways of doing things that we're deliberately trying to tap into in a way. And what we're wanting to do is people learn how to work together as a local community, that they look at national politics and say, I'm not going to do that crap, right? That doesn't work. And all of a sudden, those strategies that have been working so well stop working. So what is deliberative engagement? Whole bunch of words, whole bunch of academic disciplines, a whole bunch of practitioner worlds. So everyone kind of uses their different terms. But the general idea is designing processes with some thought, right? That you're not just collecting opinions, but you're doing things to bring people together in a particular way, right? And using these different kind of strategies. So what I try to do in my work is these 4 big shifts. First is shift from the assumption of wicked people to wicked problems, like we've talked about, right? Second is to switch from adversaries to collaborators. And that's the most powerful thing. When you turn a perceived enemy into a collaborator, that's a huge shift, right? Not always possible in a sense. Again, there's conflict profiteers and so forth, right? But in most cases, there's something there that you can. That leads to, instead of deciding the worst of human nature, bring out the best of human nature. And that I should have. So this is, again, the heart of it, right? How do we get from that list of bad stuff to tap into the list of good stuff? And then the last one, especially if you're someone who cares about facts and information and data. Like I was saying earlier, in a polarized environment, facts don't work. They often actually backfire. Once we have a better conversation, they start mattering. So this is where dealing with toxic polarization and information chaos start coming together. I think we have to depolarize first. Right? But then once we depolarize, now we're working together on shared problems. Now we want good information. Now we want the data. And that's how we kind of take those on at the same place, right? When we're polarized, like if it fits my perspective, I throw it. If it doesn't, I ignore it. I can just assume it's not real. But when we're working a problem together, that's the heart of it is how do we, humans are great collaborative problem solvers when that's our identity. How do we create ways to tap into that identity? Instead of voters or consumers or activists, how do we're collaborative problem solvers? That's what we most need in our communities. So yeah, so these are kind of the key aspects of nuts and bolts. I know we're almost running out of time here. So this is more specifically kind of what we do to create these different kind of meetings. It's a picture of one of the meetings that we do. The first is this notion of having an organization that commits to what I call principled impartiality, right? And I have a paper up here about that. I mentioned earlier, the CPD serves as an impartial resource. By impartial, it doesn't mean we don't have a position, right? And it also doesn't mean like, ooh, we're really good at understanding and avoiding all our biases. No, human biases are dominant. Most of them are subconscious, right? But so when we talk about impartiality, it's a professional. We're playing a role of being impartial, right? But the notion of principled impartiality is people need to trust me as being impartial. I don't have a dog in the fight for running our meetings. But we're partisan for democracy. We care about small d democracy. We care about voices being heard. We care about free speech. We care about a lot of that kind of stuff, equal political rights in a sense. So there are some values we bring in, but we also care about good information. Right? This quote from Desmond Tutu has been said to me over the years. How can you be impartial? How can you be neutral? You have to pick a side, right? If you're neutral in situations of justice, you've chosen the side of oppressor. I don't want to be pro-oppressor, right? I will quickly say oppression oppressee is a dominant narrative that we might fall into a little too quickly. So be careful, like who's the oppressor and oppressee, but I'm not saying it never happens, right? When I wrote this paper, I initially kind of borrowed his concept to the other side, like if you're neutral in situations of bullshit. Now, you might be saying, okay, why is this academic using all these bad words? Bullshit's an academic term now. Right. So researching bullshit. There's a difference between lying and bullshitting, right? So I'm being an academic, I'm not being vulgar. Yeah. But that line, so I'm constantly dealing with the tension between these three things. I want to be this impartial resource to help people come together, and I need to be trusted as that for me to do my work. But I'm pro-democracy and I'm pro-good information. And those three things are often in tension with each other and try to negotiate that. That's certainly the same thing that Rangel is doing away. Right? But I don't want to overemphasize impartiality so much that I forget about there's such things as facts. Right? Same thing of being so open-minded, right? And then how we do it, we're framing things in a very different way. How are we engaging things? We often have discussion guides that people are reacting to. We're not just relying on whoever's showing up and what they're saying. So there's an art and a science to all these kind of meetings that we run that we'll be bringing to Braver Angels nationally. I'm actually giving this talk nationally to all, open to all the alliances that are interested in the citizen-led solutions, I think on the 23rd. Right. So I'll be working with some of my, colleagues in this world to kind of equip all these alliances on how to have these different kind of issue-based conversation. If you have an issue-based conversation, you need good information and you need that thing framed in a productive way. Right. So that's part of all we're bringing, not only to here, obviously, but also nationally. Right? Having small groups kind of engage each other, and then processes are designed to help people engage. Most of our processes allow people to express their opinion, not talk to each other. So how do we do that? You see the round tables being kind of one of the technologies we use, right? So get away from this one at a time in the microphone, just giving people a chance to express their opinion to actually engage. So some of the resources, National Coalition of Dialogue and Deliberations, an organization I've been involved with for 20 years. I was their board chair for about 10 of those. They've got a great kind of resource page that talks about these are processes to explore an issue, to transform a conflict, to make decisions together, or to spark collaborative action. Right? All these people that are figuring out how do we engage each other more productively. That we're getting more and more of these tools. We just did a citizens assembly in Fort Collins in the spring. That's kind of one of these democratic innovations. How do we start doing more of that? Colorado actually is a hotbed for this work, in particular different ways that we're tapping into. I talked a lot about the distinction between debate, deliberation, and dialogue. Obviously, I'm biased. I put deliberation in the middle because I run the Center on Deliberation. Each of those are a different way of engaging. Each of those has some strengths and weaknesses. Each of those have different purposes. Deliberation, I think, is the best and the most important. It's also by far the most resource heavy. Doing deliberation well takes a lot of time and takes a lot of resources. Right? So for me, we need better of all three of these. Most debate is bad, but good debate helps us deal with information chaos. Right? Good dialogue helps us deal with toxic polarization. Deliberation ideally brings out the best in both debate and dialogue. It brings people together in productive ways to deal with polarization, but it also is biased in good, rigorous information. So how do we bring those both together to take on the challenge today? Now, I'm not going to be able to talk about this. I'm just going to intrigue y'all. One of my favorite tools, I always joke that I've written this on a cocktail napkin or a coffee shop napkin probably about 300 times over the last 20 years. But the basic idea is any really good participatory decision needs to go through these three stages. Divergent thinking, how do we get beyond the usual suspects, beyond our assumptions, and hear from lots of people? Also, in a democracy, we want to hear from everybody, not just the dominant voices that have time, right? The groan zone is once we have lots of voices, our brain is not wired for this. Right? Too many voices. The growth, I tell my students, like, if your table is struggling, it means we're doing it right? Because democracy is hard. Right. So then what are the processes to work through the groan zone and develop each understanding? But then eventually we need convergent thinking. We can't just agree to disagree always. We have to make some decisions. So on the back end, it's judgment. It's saying some ideas are better than others, and it's moving to action, right? Each of these three stages require a different way of talking, requires different processes. So part of what I'm doing is when we talk about building capacity in our communities, what capacity do we have for all three of these? How do we evaluate our community, and then how do we intervene to kind of improve and build? Obviously, the CPD is really in the middle here, right? Brave Angels is good in the middle here, like bringing people together. The move to citizens-led solutions starts now getting to convergent thinking, right? Not just building this mutual understanding, undoing polarization, but also doing things together, right? And then last, deliberative facilitators. Since our brains aren't wired for this, we often need help. That's what my program is. I've got 40 students that are trained as facilitators. You'll see some of them next week. Next week's process is designed to not be facilitated because I'm trying to get thousands of communities across the country to do what we're doing next week. But we'll have some of my students there. So we'll probably have some facilitator, or if anything, you'll have some young people with you that will get to do the process with you. Right? If you come to other CPD events, I have a sign-up sheet here if you want to be on the CPD email notification list. If you're not on there already. Just do different things. We get hired by the city, hired by the school district to do different things. So last kind of quick 2 points, and this is particularly relevant to Brave Angels. These are now getting longer term. How do we reinvigorate and create new, what I call bridging institutions? Most organizations bring like-minded people together. Right? Internet, awesome at bringing like-minded people together. Right? What we've lost in our communities is these organizations that bring people together across difference in productive ways. So actually, if you think about a lot of organizations, political parties and advocacy groups and the internet, they're really good. They're more polarizing organizations. They're bonding organizations, bring like-minded people together. These on the bottom are potential bridging organizations. We've lost a lot of these. They've like membership and so forth. So a lot of my work now is how do we reinvigorate these or create new ones or get organizations that are more polarizing to become more bridging. Right? Braver Angels is a clear example of what I would call like a bridging organization. They're designed to bring reds and blues. One of my good friends, Elizabeth Sink, does tons of work on the interfaith community, right? Both on campus and in the community, bringing people of different faiths. We need those kind of organizations. And you're seeing an explosion of these organizations. On the link, this is the Listen First Coalition. There's 600 organizations nationally. You see Braver Angels there, Bridge USA, which I'm the faculty sponsor of a chapter on campus, lots of other different ones that are all about bringing people together in more productive ways, right? This is the counter movement to the hyperpolarization we're getting at the national level. Most of these organizations are brand new, last 4 or 5 years. More and more philanthropic organizations, more and more money getting poured into, we have to change how we talk about issues. Going through. This is another map from the National Civic League, which is housed in Denver, that has a healthy democracy ecosystem map. They've got almost 12.5 thousand groups that have some kind of role there. Some of those are advocacy groups, and that's not as much of all just bridging. I just published this article last week or 2 weeks ago. I got a few copies of it that really digs into that. Right? we're in a great place here in Fort Collins, in Northern Colorado. The Community Foundation is really leaning into this now. I'm doing some really cool stuff with them, the NOCO Foundation, to be a civic hub. We have a Braver Angels chapter now. The Discovery Museum sees themselves as a convener and wants to use their space for things. The newspaper is kind of doing some interesting stuff. The new editor, not as agreeable as the old editor, so we're working on that. We have a new CEO of CSU Student Media that really wants to be innovative. So we just had conversations the last 2 weeks of creating an opinion page for Northern Colorado that will be a CPD, journalism department, and student media, and probably some others working together. So a place online that we can talk about local issues that will be particularly designed to spark better conversations. So you'll hear about that because we'll want Braver Angels going to be a part of that as we go through. Last thing is changing how we talk about civic education, right? How do we, starting with K-12, teach students about how your brains are wired and shut? I have this article, I wrote an article about this, and skip that one. Okay, done with that. I wrote this article about it that I have up here. And how do we shift from, the goal of active citizenship is being informed and engaged. Those two adjectives come all the time. Well, once you understand human nature, like people that think they're informed are often the most misinformed, and then they engage badly, right? So I make the argument for the wise collaborator to be the new civic ideal. And wise a part of being wise is knowing what you don't know. So there's an inherent intellectual humility to it. And part of collaborators, hey, you can have a position, right? But realize the best way for you to get what you want is to know what your neighbors want, and then have the skills to work with your neighbors to work together, right? So how do we tap in early on teaching these skills? Last two slides. This one is the bad one. We showed you this vicious cycle. What we know now from the research is the virtuous cycle. The more you do this, you give people a chance to really have a real conversation. They start developing mutual understanding, not consensus, not agreement, mutual understanding, right? We think we disagree this much. We actually disagree this much. It's much more manageable. I'm not trying to get everyone to agree, right? Conflict is inherent, but we know how to manage those things, right? So then that leads to building of trust and respect. I disagree with you, but I respect you, right? Once we do that, then all of a sudden when we're having a conversation, instead of talking past each other and me trying to win and vanquish the other side, we're actually having a conversation that refines both of our opinions. We get smarter, right? So public engagement becomes public brainstorming, public problem solving. Instead of just collecting what people think at a meeting, we're actually elevating our thinking at a meeting. And that becomes that learning community that we need. And that leads to the collaboration and co-creation that we need in our communities to face our challenges, to take on the issues that we care about, right? And this is a virtuous cycle. The more you do this, the easier it is to do. And the more we have individual cities doing this, the easier for the next city to do it. And more and more and more. And that, for me, is the way we save democracy, from the bottom up, one city at a time. So, I'm done. Sorry. I do want to make it easy for anyone to leave because I've already stolen 3 extra minutes of your time, but I think we've got the room, and I'm happy to stick around and kind of ask questions and stuff.
Invite to next week. Who should we invite to next week?
Yeah, so what we're doing next week, and do RSVP because for next week we'll need to be in tables. So we got a room now that fits a certain amount of people that's free to me. But then there's bigger rooms that can pay a little bit, right? So we'll see. If we get more RSVPs, I'm happy. The more the merrier. We'll just need to move to a bigger room, still on the same floor. So RSVP. So it'll be kind of a combination. It'll be about a third me talking, a third small group kind of doing an exercise together, and then a third kind of Q&A reporting out kind of what you hear from that. It's an exercise I've done for 20 years with my students. When we ask my alumni, like, what's the one thing you remember from the CPD, this one comes out more than any other, this value exercise to how do we learn how to talk about values. So that y'all responding to what value is most important to you. And we'll have 11 values, like business cards with the values that you'll organize and talk about, a whole set of questions to get you to kind of engage that across difference. It's all designed really to build trust. For me, trust is assuming good motives of the people you disagree with. It's one thing to disagree. It's another thing to see that they're just a bad person, right? So this value exercise is to help you get past your brain I've got good values to find the people I disagree with by what they're against. It tries to get away from that, right? So yeah, that's what we're doing next week. Invite whoever's willing to pick up. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of an introduction to collaborative problem solving.
Yeah. And, I said you don't have to come to both, right? Obviously, if you came this one, next week will be easier, right? I'll have to recap a few things next week. If you're inviting someone next week, I do basically have videos of what I just went through. A little older, you'll see on the resource page that I might, with the sliding, I might even redo them today. I don't know, as I go home. We have this video, but I'm not sure how great so we'll be able to share this video. I'll put a link to this video on the resource page, right? So it'll probably help for someone to kind of watch, but them sitting down and watching an hour and a half is not fun, right? We're told now like our videos have to be like 3 minutes long, the attention span of humans. So I'll try to kind of make it that you don't have to know all this stuff, but the more they kind of do some of this background, the better. Back, got lots of hands here. I'll kind of go right to left here. Yeah.
So looking at these 600 organizations and whatnot, is this like a national all hands on deck for the next 1 year, 3 years, whatever? And then you talked about things like curriculum changes. Is that like a longer 20-year thing? So could you just?
So this is that link, the Listen First Coalition.
Yeah.
Every single one of these logos is a link to an organization.
Right.
And a lot of these are national, some of them are local, a lot of them, like Brave Angels, are national with local chapters, right? I think it's certainly, and the name of this field I'm in has changed a lot over the years, and different people connect. I used to call it the dialogue and deliberation kind of field, NCDD. Lately it's been called the bridging field, right? People are really focused on bridging. But then other people are now saying, there's this phrase of like, you don't want to build a bridge between the arsonist and the firefighter, right? It just kind of brings in the conflict puppeteer, right? So now people are talking about, sometimes you bridge, like bring people together. Sometimes you build, like, let's just build something new that, engages people differently instead of like specifically bridging. And then sometimes you block. So it's build, block, bridge. There's some things that are like, no. And this kind of ties into I'm pro-democracy, right? So something that's explicitly authoritarian or like white supremacy. No, white supremacy doesn't really fit into democracy. So there's all different kind of things. So within that broader movement, some people are like, we need, we need to focus on this election and so forth, right? Obviously, be more progressive. Other people are still more long-term. We have to kind of change the game. My focus is more, I don't want to focus on national politics. I'm not saying don't focus, right? That's just not my focus. I'm building from the bottom up, right? And there's all different kind of branches on kind of how we do this. Okay, so I think that's all your interview. Yeah, it's you.
Hey, Marcy, thanks so much for this. It was really inspiring and lots of great information and ideas.
And you lasted more than 3 minutes, so that's good. Your attention span.
I would love to come next week, but I can't. Is there going to be like a hybrid option, or will you be doing it again?
Yeah, so I actually am. I meant to bring flyers. So on March 7th, which is also a Saturday for some reason, we're doing an intergenerational dialogue. We've been doing these over the years with the Partnership for Racial and Communities and Compass School. So Compass School is right there by Whole Foods. So that morning we're going to do the same value exercise. It'll be a little bit intergenerational kind of focus. With we try to get like half the table is 60 and over, and half the table is 20 and younger. Though for that one, we're not just saying people in between can be. So we're gonna do that again. Part of this value exercise I'm doing next week is I'm working with a couple of national organizations. We're gonna announce it nationally. I'm kind of creating like a meeting in the box for anyone to do this themselves. I'll have some videos that will kind of cover my part that people can either show my videos or they can watch my video and then try to kind of go through the slides or whatever. So we're kind of refining it with these kind of local events, but then we'll also do some training, online training to show other people how to do it. So there'll be some additional options basically.
Yeah, we're thinking of doing a similar like values-based exercise with the Denver.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have a group that would want to do it, right? That's part of it. Is hey, Rotary Club or whatever, right? We can take over your meeting. And kind of create this, right? And that one's nice because I don't need to have my facilitators, right? It is kind of designed just to kind of talk to your neighbor kind of thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is it a mistake to frame your position or summarize it as when you do a public declaration, you've got to focus on values rather than solutions? Although ultimately you want to get to a solution, but you absolutely have to start with values.
Somewhat. I mean, one thing I'll do a little bit tomorrow. I mean, not tomorrow. Next week is I'll make in the argumentation world that where I started academically. we make distinctions between a fact claim, a value claim, and a policy claim, right? And when you're trying to do the hard work of evaluating the quality of an argument, how you evaluate a fact claim, value claim, and a policy claim is very different, right? So the quick version of this is fact claims are something tied to reality, right? Like now I work more and more with journalists, and there's like this saying in journalism education, like if one side's saying it's raining, the other side's saying it's not raining, the job of the journalist is like there's disagreement on whether it's raining, is to go outside and see if it's effing raining, right? Yeah, so fact claims, some fact claims are really hard to who's right or wrong. Like, hey, does a mask reduce COVID or whatever, that cause and effect and lots of variables. But some fact claims are pretty clear, right? Whereas a value claim, which I focus on certainly with Book of Problems, is value claim is something's good or bad or favorable or I care about it, it's important. That there isn't an outside source we can go find out, right? In a diverse democracy that respects pluralism, we want people to have different values. And so dealing with value claims of what's important to us, that's a whole nother way of dealing with things. But to get to your question, policy claims are claims about what we should do, right? We should do X, right? We should build a wall, or we should do this, or we should do that. My argument is any policy claim inherently involves factual claims and value claims, right? Because if I'm saying we should do X because it leads to Y, I'm both saying the factual claim, if we do X, Y will happen, right? Well, that's a factual claim. And part of the problem often is, we tend to focus on the intended positive consequences of our preferred policies, and we're blind to the unintended negative consequences, right? But the other side is really in tune to the negative unintended consequences of our policy. So part of policy claim is how to kind of fill in those blanks in a way, right? But we're saying we should do X because it leads to Y. Does X lead to Y is a factual claim we could kind of study, right? And should we do X? If I'm saying we should do X because it leads to Y, I'm saying Y is an important thing. That's a value claim. So deliberation is talk about decision making. Talk what should we do? But deliberation is always inherently going to involve facts and values. This goes back to why we can't just focus on polarization. We need to focus on information disorder, right? Depolarization helps us understand each other so that we can then do the hard work of making decisions together. Making decisions together, we need good facts. So we need to take on both of those at the same time. Yeah.
You listed lots of books up there.
Yeah.
And for those of us who have limited time
Yeah.
for reading, can you make suggestions in each of these areas,
Yeah.
but they were different areas?
Yeah.
Where how you would rank them, or how would you say read this
Yeah,
one
and
first?
part of that is, I'll have it in the but shoot me an email. If there's something in particular you're interested in, I know, again, I'm paid to read all day long, and I actually have a budget that I can, which is very dangerous, right? So I was like, this is a good book. I'm like, ordered, and that's the reason I was on sabbatical last spring. I was supposed to finish my book, but my brain is much more interested in other people's books than my book, right? And I'm basically trying to read every other book before I write my book. Like every day, I read a book and 5 books get published. So I think I'm not going to accomplish it, but hopefully you'll have my book to read next year. But yeah, I'm happy to kind of make suggestions and so forth. And part of what I see my job is reading all those books and then translating for that, right? Go through it. I've done some stuff with the library. I mean, if y'all want to be in a book club that we meet once a month online to talk about a book, like I love talking about this stuff, so I'm willing to do that. If I had to pick one book of all of that Sam Kane, the Grown Zone book, the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making, that's one of my favorites because it kind of captures so much different
What was
ways.
the name of it again?
It's Sam Kaner with a K. It's a Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making.
Okay.
Jonathan Haidt's book is probably one of the best ones, and to start understanding the social psychology of brain science, and but there's lots of podcasts and other videos and so forth, right? So depending on the best way, I'd be happy to kind of direct you. Yeah.
So as you talk, I'm reminded of, and the word comes, or the term comes to me, my identity fragility.
Yeah.
And you touched on it briefly, but I mean, as far as fear of losing who I thought I've been, or my role in my tribe, I mean, that's scary.
Oh yeah. I mean, asking people to admit they are wrong and then tell all the people in their tribe that they're wrong too. It's like two of the hardest things for humans to ever do. So to depolarize is hard, right? And that's part of it. So how do we kind of create those things, right? How do you create easier ways for people to kind of do that and kind of reward that in a way?
Yeah, I mean, there's gotta be a whole psychology around
Oh,
it.
yeah.
It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, like one of my colleagues dove, read 6 or 7 books about cults, like all the research on how to get people out of cults and so forth. Because to what degree are some of our political things becoming cult-like in a way that people are so invested, their identity is so tied to it. Unfortunately, it's pretty much just pressed her board. So it didn't give her great tools. Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to Rotarians. In discussions with Rotarians, they seem like a very strong bridging group focused on service, helping the community, and these techniques, skills are vital to helping them accelerate their cause and effort. So the Rotarians that are left here, thank you for coming, and we look forward to
and part of that revitalizing bridging groups, right? There's that those traditionally, both some of y'all might be familiar with like Robert Putnam's work on Bowling Alone. So that article that I mentioned, the bonding and bridging groups. So we had Robert Putnam here spring of 24. How many of y'all have seen Join or Die on Netflix? Okay. You have Netflix, watch Join or Die. First of all, Join or Die is a documentary about an academic. And we need much more academic biographies right now. So Robert Putnam is known as one of the preeminent political scientists, but he wrote a book called Bowling Alone. How many have heard of that concept before, Bowling Alone? So he wrote an article and then wrote a book. And the basic argument was like more people are bowling, but they're bowling individually. Like bowling leagues has collapsed, right? He initially done research in Italy and then he brought it to the United States of looking at, okay, when do we know a community is healthy politically or civically or not? And basically people being in groups came out as the number one issue. And then what he also saw, starting with the 60s going all the way to now, is all those groups have died or are dying off or are dropping, right? People aren't joining groups anymore, or at least real groups with real people together personally, right? So the internet, lots of groups. Right? What's happened politically, Diminished Democracy is another book that kind of did a good job of this, is, okay, people are joining the NRA or the Sierra Club or whatever, they're joining groups, but they're writing a check to a national lobbying group, right? They're not meeting together with real people, right? So what Rotary used to do, Lions used to do more, and other different organizations is different people gathering together. You join for bowling or you join for yoga or whatever, but there was diversity in the group, whether that was political diversity or racial diversity or religious diversity or whatever. So then when someone came to tell you how evil the other side was, you're like, I know, Joe, you're not that evil, right? And we've lost that, right? So that's that argument of how do we recreate existing or strengthen existing or create new bridging groups. Bowling Alone, the way I frame it in there, they're an unintentional bridging group. The point of bowling leagues is bowling, but if it's a diverse group, right? But then you have more and more intentional bridging groups, like Braver Angels, like Bridge USA, like Interfaith. The whole point of the organization is they're coming together. I frame myself as a bridging support organization. Right. So I'm trying to help people bridge and kind of create meetings and train facilitators. But then I'm telling you my whole essay now, but the interesting that I first kind of saw advocacy groups as primarily bonding. Most advocacy groups, you join because you picked a side, right? You care about gun rights, you join NRA, right? You care about, LGBT rights, you join GLAAD, right? So for a lot of those groups, they've already come up with a solution. So they tend to be kind of more certain and kind of closed-minded in the sense, like, we got the solution, we just need to get enough power, enough people to supplement it. But then I mentioned Partnership for Age-Friendly Communities, our partner with Intergenerational. We helped start that about 10, 12 years ago. It's an organization focused on older residents, right? It started with demographic information about the stat that we used back in 2009, I think, was in Larimer County, the percentage of people over 65 was going to increase 120% over the 10 years. The percentage of people over 80 was going to quintuple, right? So we just asked this question, what kind of community do we want for our older residents? On average, people lose their ability to drive about 10 years before they pass, right? we're a very car-centric society, right? So it sparked all these conversations. Well, after a year of conversations, we were excited to do something. Well, there wasn't an organization to do something. There was not an organization to take the ball and run with it, right? So we ended out kind of finding a national organization and created a new organization, the Partners for Race-Friendly Communities, which is a 501c3 now, a certified nonprofit. But what is fascinating now that I look back, it's passionate about an issue, but it's really open-minded about solutions. Right? It brings people together across political lines, across public, private, nonprofit lines, urban, rural, somewhat, because it is a county kind of thing. But it's a whole bunch of people are passionate about that problem, but are curious and want to be collaborative about solutions. And I kind of realized, like, that's what we need for a lot of issues, right? If the dominant voices on all the issues are people that have already figured out a solution and they're just trying to pitch their solution, right? Then it's going to probably be a bad conversation, right? But the more and more we have people that really, really care about a problem, but want to get together across perspectives to figure out the best way to address it. So how do we create, so I'm calling those bridging advocacy groups, right? Most advocacy groups are bonding. So that's kind of the roadmap on that paper that I'll be using for my work nationally of like, how do we create different ways of engaging so the dominant voices aren't always so certain of themselves, right? Yeah.
Are you going to address the questions in this?
I'd rather kind of get questions from the audience. I'm going to do that after the fact, but if you've got something on there you want, ask it.
I just want to point out that some of these questions put in have 3 votes.
Okay.
And so they actually represent what number of people want.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to call that, I can pull it up, but it's distracting. So what I said is I'll go to that afterwards, and then on the Google Doc, I'll cut and paste the question and kind of provide things. But yeah, any of those that you want to pull out, I'm happy to. Yeah.
I'll tell you the 2 that have 3 votes. How do we train ourselves, our brains to engage better? That's one of the questions.
Yeah, so part of the how do you train your brain better? Some of it is read. We have all these books about kind of how to do that. So some of those books, and then a lot of it is practice, is actually doing it. So that gets back to that very last slide of the virtuous cycle. The more you do this, the easier it is to do. Right? I tell my students in particular, like your years in college, like you're going to be exposed to so much more diversity of thought than ever. Right? Like cultivate those relationships. Right? I've got a group, most of my students are going to be more on the progressive side, more blues, right? I have a core group of my former students that are more reds that I communicate with a lot, right? That I can send them an email and say, hey, what am I missing here, right? Because, I'm at a university. Most people around me are more progressive. My family is actually much more conservative. I grew up, my parents were small business owners, right? So a different relationship with government and taxes than a lot of academic friends of mine, right? So how do you kind of cultivate that? Having someone who thinks differently than you that you can trust is a huge resource. Right? To do that, that's part of what Brave Angels is, right? Like helps you, where you naturally want to gather around people like-minded, right? Cultivate those relationships. And there's some of that, like diversify your media diet, right? There's some kind of cool tools for that. The Al Fontes media chart is really good. She's actually from Denver as well, in Colorado. She ranks all the media, both left to right and quality crap, basically, right? So she's got the vertical access and has all these ways of measuring that. So it's not so much like you force yourself to watch the media of the other side, because a lot of that's going to be horrible media. A lot of that's conflict profiteer media, right? So it's more of like, find good sources of that disagree with you, that kind of tap into.
What's that called again?
The I think it's Ad Fontes.
Ad Fontes.
Yeah. I can float up here. Yeah, Ad Fontes, sorry. You Google Ad Fontes media chart. So basically it's this.
Okay.
And she has all these processes and all these people that kind of help her actually analyze news stories. And she has it. This is media companies. She has it for podcasts. She has it for radio stations. But you see, it's the most extreme left to the most extreme right. But then it also has quality. So the very top is just fact-based. They're just pure news reporting. Then you got like a mix of facts, but they're their opinion, but they're kind of thoughtful opinion or so forth. And then it kind of gets down, to pure opinion, selective opinion, contains misleading information, and it just, makes stuff up. Any of these, you can kind of click, and it will take you to like the individual stories they evaluated and so they have a whole process of doing this. Yeah.
With all the organizations you identified that are working on the same thing we're talking about here today. Are you hearing anything that would be considered viable alternatives to the two-party system? And the Congress as our primary decision making body to get us beyond, sort of undermine the conflict profiteers and get us as facilitators leaders.
Yeah, I mean, the best book on that is a book by Lee Druckmann, has a book called Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop. It's a great title. So he really kind of digs into a lot of democratic innovations and different ways of doing things. Some of these are multi-party, some of these are proportional representation. We have ranked choice voting here in Fort Collins. That's one of them that he kind of talks about. None of these are perfect, and getting them through. The problem is that the system's working really well for the people in the system. If your goal is like money and influence versus solving problems. Again, my research doesn't focus on that, right? But there are smart people that are kind of working on that, trying to change things. The civic assembly that we did, that's kind of this new thing, more local, that you're getting more and more traction. Europe is using that a lot more, but that's this. I don't know if you want me to get into the nuts and bolts of what that was, but you get a group. It's like a jury, basically. You get a group of people represented, and they spend like 2 weeks on an issue and come up with recommendations. Like Congress isn't working as a deliberative body, so we're creating these alternative kind of short-term deliberative bodies. I think I have it here. I just bought a book, literally kind of came out 2 days ago. I like this author, Helene Lattimore, Politics Without Politicians, The Case for Citizen Rule. I'm not exactly sure her argument yet. I haven't started yet, but I will say I've made this argument before, that give me a random sample of 100 Americans and I would outperform Congress by 500% for like 1% of the cost. But that's a whole other argument.
Two-part question.
Yeah. Again, feel free to leave if you need to leave. We're way over time, so no problem whatsoever.
Given all of the organizations that are Great Angels as
Yes.
what percentage or number of people are participants?
Yeah, that's tough. I think there's this theory. Maybe one of y'all know who came up with this theory. I think it's like 3%. If you get 3% of the people, is it 3.5% of the people, that's kind of like a tipping point in a way, right? So that's part of, with Lori, the new CEO of Great Angels. I think he's been using that in a sense of like, how much do we need to grow, right? With all these different organizations to get to the point that we have 3.5%.
Only asking what we have right now.
I don't know if I have it off the top of my head.
All right, so the second part of the question is, it seems to me that an awful lot of the other side, I don't care which side you're on.
Yeah.
But the other side, they're not willing to look at even a specific thing for fear that if they were to agree with that,
Yeah.
it would.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah, I mean,
real
going back to
problem.
catty corner thinking, right? Like I said, hey, just admit like one flaw of your side or give them credit for something will change things. But doing that in a polarized zero-sum thing, like that's a sign of weakness, right?
So
Like,
where I was coming
yeah.
from in this was that there are, if the numbers of people that are willing to hopefully bridge are so small, what is the hope? I mean, where do we need to be in order to get to the kind of bridging that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, I think you're already seeing it in some places, right? And you're seeing a lot of momentum, so it's kind of building on that. And part of it is, I mean, if you look at polls of people really frustrated with the amount of polarization, how the system's working, you're talking about 80%. Right? People know what we're doing now is not working. So what we're needing to do is to provide an alternative. So that's the work that I'm doing with thousands of people in different cities. Is okay, the more and more we have Great Angels chapters, the more we have CPDs, the more our library does tons of work with Rich Harwood, who's someone I've known for 20 years, as the public innovations project that's working with libraries across the country for libraries to do this work, right? So we have a community foundation that is one of the leaders now. I'm working with them a lot. Actually, just put a proposal in this week for them to buy me out of a clap for me to spend a significant amount of time for them. They're wanting to be a civic hub for northeastern Colorado. They've got 9 counties that they're working with, right? There's more and more grants, Trust for Civic Life, and all these things, the money, you know, so there's a lot of momentum now for it. And for me, it kind of from the bottom up, right? So I mean, if we might even already be at 3.5% in some senses, right? Especially in certain cities that are kind of doing more and more of this.
That's a very specific data point,
Yeah.
but it's hopeful.
Yeah.
It doesn't take 100%.
Yeah.
Shoot.
So thank you. I'll keep on answering questions or one-on-one. So I got some of my articles up here. All these articles will be linked in the Google Doc, right? If you don't like Google Docs, I know some people are like, I don't want to click a Google link. Shoot me an email. You've got my email on there, and I can like make a PDF of it and send it to you, so you have access to all the links. If you got any issue.
Parents got this one.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank
Thank you.
All those things like.
Yeah,
Just read that.
Good
Good to see you.